I remember a time in 1977 when the Duchess of Devonshire, who then was the deputy chair, when Alan Benrose was the chair and I was the chair of the technical panel. And Debo, as she was known to those that were friends with her, rang me up one day and said, would you mind meeting me and a colleague in Wirksworth churchyard at a certain time on a certain day, but my colleague doesn't know you're going to be there, so perhaps we could bump into each other. So I guessed this was about a submission we had made to the Civic Trust that Wirksworth might be considered for a special project, which Barry, my colleague at that time in the county design and conservation team,
and a member of the technical panel,
had sort of soused out with his deep knowledge of what was happening around. But this was all a bit supposedly secret, and we weren't quite sure what it was about. So I said to Barry, can you be in the churchyard too? And then when they bumped into me, we can bump into you. So the day turned up, and it was awful. It was siling it down with rain. I'm stood in the churchyard with my umbrella, and then down the pathway comes the Duchess with a couple of people, and went, hello, Derek, fancy meeting you here. I've got a friend here. This is Simon Sainsbury, and I can't remember his colleague's name. And I didn't really know who Simon Sainsbury was, but quickly realised that he was actually a member of the grocery family that one or two people have heard of. And he ran this monument trust. And the Duchess wanted him to see Wirksworth, because it turned out later that it was the monument trust that might be funding this project. So then we set off and almost immediately bumped into Barry.
A happy accident.
Happy accident. And the Duchess obviously knew Barry just as well as me, welcomed that, and then we went round in a little fivesome. And as we started to go around, and we left the churchyard going to, I think it's St Mary's Gate, and on the right-hand side was the baker's, Killers.
Called Killers.
And Barry, I mean, we could all smell this, and Barry said, this is really, really good, this baker's, they're fantastic. And then the Duchess went, oh, that reminds me, the chef's on holiday and I've got nothing for tea. So she said, I'll buy a loaf of bread for tea. And so we all went into the shop, and she picked out a loaf or a couple of loaves that she wanted. And then she felt sort of in her purse and said, oh, I've got no money. And Simon Sainsbury did the same.
He'd actually got, I think, a £50 note that no one in Wirksworth had ever seen, and it was impossible to break down. So I think I paid for the loaf.
Well, you probably did. You were definitely better off than I was. So anyway, we then toured around Wirksworth and showed them all around it. And then she asked if we could come back for tea. Barry couldn't come for whatever reason, I can't remember. But so I went, I hadn't known about this, so I went back with her and Simon and his colleague. And it was surreal, because there we were. We went into the main state dining room in Chatsworth. We had our loaf that the Duchess cut, and she produced a bottle of Chatsworth jam and butter, and there we were. We had our tea. That was the tea. And we were drinking our tea, and these were out of really expensive china in this place. But it gave me a bit of an opportunity, which is, I guess, what the Duchess was planning, to do a sort of sell to Simon Sainsbury and his colleague about why it would be great if they could fund an organisation to help rescue Wirksworth.
And it has to be said, Wirksworth at that time was in a very bad state of disrepair. It had escaped the redevelopment of the 1960s because property prices were so very low and there was no incentive to redevelop. A benefit of that was that the historic core was totally intact, but semi-derelict. And so it was a wonderful opportunity, wasn't it, to carry out this Derbyshire Historic Building Trust project that went on for several years. And during that period, Debo would ask for a little tour to see how things were going on. I was very delighted to take her around. The last time, when the trust had virtually completed its several heroic rescue operations, there was one building in the old marketplace, the old Palladian brick wing to number 15 Marketplace, which was still derelict. And looking at it from across the road, Debo says to me, "Well, why haven't you done that one?" So I said, "Well, it's lived in by a very elderly lady, and we feel we can't disturb her at this stage of life. So we'll wait and deal with her successor." By this time, she'd walked across the road, and by this time she was looking through the window. And we saw through the window this lady was lying on a chaise longue with her arms across her chest like this, asleep. And Debo turns to me with that wicked sense of humour that she had to say, "But she's dead. She's quite dead. I think it's terribly cruel of you leaving her there mouldering like that." In that very distinctive Mitford 1930s voice, which penetrated the room, and the lady woke up. We had to walk away rather quickly.
In the intervening time between those two events, I'd left not knowing whether Simon Sainsbury was interested in this or not. And the Duchess then rang me up and said, could I come and join a group of people at Chatsworth for lunch. And the problem was at the time, Pauline was away and I was looking after the children. There were two young children. And I said, I can't come, I'm really sorry. And she said, "Oh, that's no problem at all, but bring your children along." So I thought, okay, and so got them all in their Sunday best and whatever, and so I drove up there and arrived at the gates wondering where I should park. "Oh no, you go through." So I went through the gates and up to the front and had the door opened, and out we got, and the children. And then we were taken up to the state dining room. And when we arrived at the state dining room, there was quite a lot of people there. So all the great of the good from wherever in the UK, I guess. And so Debo came straight up to me and said, "So glad you're here. I don't think you know," and it started to introduce me to people. And so I looked at the children, and then she looked down at the children and said, "Hello, what are your names?" "Oh, Sarah and Ben. Now, you must come with Granny Debo. She will look after you because your dad is far too busy to do this now," and took the children off. And I got absorbed in the sort of tete-a-tete before the meal, and then suddenly thought, the children, what's happened to the children? And then saw that they were sat at the top table with paper and crayons drawing one of the statues in the room. And so I went over to sort of see what was happening, and Deborah followed me across and said, "Now, you forget about your children, they're fine. They are the VIPs, they're going to sit either side of me." So they sat on the top table either side of Debo, and I was directed to sit with a group which included Simon Sainsbury and other people from the Monument Trust, I guess. So again, I got absorbed with the meal and so on. And then I suddenly saw Sarah and Ben were running around between the tables and all the statuary and the antiques. I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be a disaster. So I quickly went over to Deborah again and said, oh no, that's right. I asked the children, I said, you can't do that. And they said, Granny Debo said we could go up. We've been very good over the meal, so we could go and run around. So I went over to Granny Debo and said, I wonder if they could go outside. And she said, oh, of course, what a good idea. I'll get the butler to take them out. And I just thought, that's absolutely wonderful. We've got all these people there, really important people, and she should treat the two young children, about 3 and 5, as the priority.